Hey guys, Brian here with Better Chess Training. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing my first game of 2020. As I mentioned in my previous video, I'm going to be analyzing on 100 of my serious game, at least 100 of them, if I play more than 100 serious games this year. And I won't put them all on the channel, but this one I thought was pretty instructive as well as somewhat entertaining. I enjoyed it at the very least. So check it out. Hey guys, today's video I'm going to be sharing my first game of 2020. And this was played on Lichess, and it was for the Twitter chess tournament, which is coming to the close of its preliminary rounds. And hopefully, at the time you see this, we'll be moving on to the playoffs, which I believe I've qualified for. Second place in my section. But in any case, this game was part of that, and let's get started. Starts out with d4. I'm playing white here against my opponent, who's actually rated a couple hundred points below me. Knight to f6, knight to f3, e6, e3, and here we have the Colle system. My opponent plays c5 here, and bishop to d3. This is the standard response. C takes d4, so this is a little bit different, and I think his idea here is that after e takes d4, d5, he kind of relieves the tension on the d4 square. Not really, it's definitely a book move, but I don't think necessarily the strongest move for black. But in any case, we move on. We castle. Bishop to d6 is played, and that's probably one of the reasons he exchanged is that now he can move his bishop without worrying about d takes c5, which is in the main line. Knight b to d2, castled, and c3. So we have a kind of a normal position here, kind of a Cambridge Springs pawn structure that is very common in openings like the Queen's Gambit Decline, although here the colors are reversed, and usually the way that it is. Usually it is black that has the minority on, I'm sorry, white usually has a minority with A and B pawns and a half-open C file, and black usually has the half-open E file. So strategies are actually somewhat similar in that in this case, white typically will attack towards the king side, and black will usually direct efforts towards the queen side. But again, every game's a little bit different. Those are just some general guidelines in what happens in these type of pawn structures. Okay, knight b to d7. Here I was expecting knight to c6, but knight b to d7 is not a bad move. And rook to e1, again taking up this half-open E file, starting to put pressure here, and queen to c7. So fairly typical play. And here I make a slight mistake, not really a big one, but what I should have played is queen to e2, which protects this e5 square and prevents the freeing move by black, which would be e5. And you can see here, e5, if e5 is played, then these two pieces get forked because I have more defenders of this pawn than are attackers. Instead, I played knight to f1 with the idea of going to g3, which isn't a terrible move, but queen to e2 has actually been found in a few games, including an old game by Colle himself, as well as Reshevsky. So we would consider that to be the standard move. So knight to f1, h6, and knight to g3, which was my plan. And this has some attacking ideas of coming to h5 at some point, also protecting the e4 square. Okay, rook to e8 is played, and now black is definitely preparing this e5 push, and this is where not not having played e2 earlier is causing me a little bit of trouble. So in the game, I actually had a little bit of a hard time finding a plan. So I actually passed. I played a3. Not the best move necessarily, but and if my opponent plays e5, he equalizes fairly easily. D takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and bishop to e3. Black has this isolated pawn, but his development's very good. Now this light square bishop is free, and I would consider this to be an equal position. But in the game, my opponent let me off the hook with a5, and this allows me to play an interesting move, bishop to b5. So this kind of stymies. The idea here is we kind of stymie Black's attempts to play e5 by pinning this knight. My opponent follows up with b6, looking to develop this light square bishop, and then I play e5, which actually seems to be pretty good. Natural follow-up to this pin, attacking that pin piece, and making him think twice about playing his bishop to b7. Instead, he plays, now here, just to go back, instead of knight to e5, I could have also played queen to e2 again, in lieu of Black's next move, which you'll see here. Go back here. After knight to e5, my opponent plays bishop to a6. And there's a few ways this can go. Doing some analysis with the computer, a line that the computer likes is knight takes d7, knight takes d7. By the way, if bishop takes b5, that's a mistake. Knight to f6 check, g takes f6, queen to g4 check, king to f8, and knight to f5, okay? Because if e takes f5, we have bishop takes h6 is checkmate. So very dangerous line for Black, and that was if he plays bishop takes b5 here. So if he plays knight takes d5, we've got bishop takes a6, rook takes a6, and then knight to h5 with some attacking ideas. If bishop takes h2 check, king to h1, and bishop to d6, we have queen to g4, a very dangerous position here. And white can probably enjoy a slight edge here. For example, g6, preventing the checkmate, bishop takes h6. A little bit of a dangerous attack, although there's no immediate checkmate in sight, but definitely I think white has a slight edge in this line. But if we go back to the game, I did take on a6, and my reasoning here was that after rook takes a6, if I do hit that queen to e2, it does gain a tempo, hitting this rook on a6. I just thought this rook was a little bit misplaced. Okay, but as it stands, this game is fairly even at the moment. Okay, my idea though here is now I play f4, and this secures the e5 square. Okay, my opponent plays b5 now, looking to make this what they call a minority attack with these two pawns again, and trying to create structural weaknesses here. And I play knight to h5, which was one of my ideas behind playing knight to g3. Now this move isn't horrible, but is not the best move for white. White could have played that queen to e2. Again, very thematic here. And the line here analyzed with computer, rook to b8, bishop to e3 is even for both sides about. But I do like white here with this nice knight here on e5. But the computer evaluates it as pretty even. But here with knight to h5, even though, so here's something to think about when you're looking at these games. Even though the knight does not, I'm sorry, the computer doesn't evaluate this as the best move, I have a clear idea behind it, and I've seen games with plans like this, and so I'm very familiar with the attacking ideas, and I think my opponent maybe was not quite as sure, because here he plays a little bit of a mistake. Before I show you that, what he should have played was knight takes h5, queen takes h5, and then knight to f6, which is pretty much even. I have to retreat my queen, but I have some ideas of attacking in the future with things like g4 and g5, maybe with h4 in there, and maybe f5 in there at some point. So white has this nice kind of flowing attacking idea on the king side, whereas black at this point is put a little bit on the defensive, but probably is even with the best play by black here. Okay, let's go back to the game. However, my opponent does play knight to e4, so see if you can come up with the best move for white here. In fact, well, there's a couple good moves, and see if you can come up with one of them. Okay, well here I played queen g4, and this threatens checkmate here, and basically gives me a big advantage. And you'll see how the game went. Just as a side note, another idea that is very good is just taking here on 4. And then after d takes e4, we can play queen to g4 with some of the ideas which I'm going to show you. Okay, after queen to g4, my opponent plays bishop to f8, threatening or defending against the checkmate. And I take here on d7. Maybe you guys are seeing the idea already. And that brings the queen to d7. And here I've got an interesting little fork idea. Of course, this knight on e4 is protecting the f6 square. So my next move here is rook takes e4. Now, of course, if d takes e4, knight to f6 check wins this queen. So my opponent played f5, forking my rook and my queen. However, now there is a line that I could have played, and I didn't quite think it was as good as what I did play in the game. Knight to f6 check, and then after the king moves, then knight takes d7, f takes g4, and then retreat my rook. And here I'm a piece up, and pretty straightforward in terms of my advantage. But what I played in the game instead, I thought was pretty effective as well, and that is queen to g6. Of course, my opponent cannot take this rook because of this knight fork, and therefore I'm going to end up a piece ahead. My opponent plays queen to f7, and I take it. King takes f7, and then I retreat my rook to e2. The reason I retreated to e2 is that my idea is to bring this other rook here to e1, because besides having an extra piece, white also has this backward e6 pawn, which is going to be a target for much of the rest of the game. Now, I thought this game was pretty instructive, as I'll show you the rest of the game here, because it shows that even though I'm a piece ahead, the game doesn't just play itself. I still need to keep coming up with good plans, and as you'll see, my opponent tries to do his best to create some counterplay, but because I'm continuing to play strategically, I'm able to stifle his counterplay and win the game, which we'll see here. So after this, king to g7, knight to g3, just retreating my knight, pretty much the only move, and my opponent locks up the queen side here with a4. I'm not sure if that was the best move, but again, he's down a piece. Maybe he's trying to simplify things and prepare for a grim defense of his e6 pawn. Okay, bishop to d2 is played, and the idea is simply to free up the first rank so this rook can come over. Bishop to e7, he's trying to get his rook into play. And then I play knight to h1, and the idea here is to take a little journey with this knight, either to e5 or c5, depending on what happens here. And I've got time to do that because this position is pretty closed. And again, I do have an extra piece, so I have some leeway, but I am trying to play a little more accurately here, or as accurately as possible. Okay, bishop to h4, and here I don't play knight to f2, which I could have played as well, but I actually want to trade off this dark square bishop. As you can see, my own pawns are on the dark squares, so his bishop is much more active than mine. So I try to offer a trade. My opponent backs up. Okay, here I play knight to f2, h4, and knight to d3 here. And h4 is played. He played h5 before. And here, not sure if I needed to do this, but I didn't want to give my opponent any counterplay. And the only thing I could see him doing is pushing the g-pawn and trying to break open one of these files and then maybe repositioning his rooks over. It would take a while, maybe unlikely, but I just wanted to stifle any type of counterplay. So I played rook to d3 to cover the third rank here. Okay, my opponent moves his rook over. And again, maybe he has similar thoughts to what I was thinking of bringing these rooks over to the h file or the g file. And I play bishop to f2. And again, the idea here is just to clear the e1 square for my rook. King to f7 and rook a to e1. So here, taking aim at this pawn now, and so this kind of keeps him tied up. Okay, g5, he's trying to break free here, and the mistake would be to allow him to, to do something with this. For example, maybe, and it's not, again, being a piece up, there's a little more leeway, but let's say I've just played knight to e5, then can probably just get rid of this, and after rook takes e5, play g4, and the problem here is that even if I take this pawn, there are some difficulties because this pawn on e6 it's very difficult to win this pawn because of my bishop can't attack it. So even though I'm up material, it might be a little more difficult for me to win. Although I still think I could probably figure something out. But again, in trying to play accurately, I keep the position open. Going back to the game with f takes g5. Okay, bishop takes g5, rook drops back to e2, and bishop to f6. Okay, knight to f4 played here, and again, the idea is just targeting this e6 square. Okay, he brings his rook over to protect it, and here I play g3. I kind of just want to resolve, either force him to push it to h3, in which case I would take it with my knight, or to exchange. And this is another good thing to do when you're up material, is just any things that's hanging out there, any questions about the position, see if you could resolve them so you could focus on using your extra material to focus on your opponent's weak spots. So here, after h takes g3, bishop takes g3, he brings his bishop here to g5. And here again, I avoid that trade of that knight because this knight is really, really nice. And you can see how it's just hopping around the position. And he backs up. And I again offer this bishop trade. He backs it up again. And now I attack his rook. And here he decides to trade the bishops finally. And here the game is pretty quick. Quick ends because after knight to f4, king to f7. See if you can figure out, let's pause again and see if you can think about what I did next. Well, here there's a lot of good moves that white can play, but seeing that the resulting position is totally winning for me, I decided to give back the knight and simplify. So knight takes d5, e takes d5, then we trade off these rooks. And here you can see with this outside pass pawn, here my opponent has to stop this, and that'll give me time to win the rest of these pawns. And so I'm just going to play through these moves. Okay, king to f3, king comes over, I play a waiting move with h3, and here I just bring my king in. There's no way, he has to stop that h-pawn, of course. And then here, after king to e5, seeing that all of his pawns are going to get taken, or potentially taken, he resigned. So pretty good start to the year for me. Again, made a couple slight errors, but the key is that we learn from our mistakes. And I thought this was also a good demonstration on how to convert a material lead. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I think analyzing your games is one of the most important things you can do to improve your chess. And so that's why I made that one of my goals for 2020 is to analyze 100 of my serious games. I won't put them all on the channel, but I will put the ones that I find the most instructive or I think are maybe the most instructive or enjoyable for you to watch. So with that in mind, I do have a link to my video I created about how to analyze your game for improvement. I created that a few years ago, but I still think it's very helpful and very relevant to what you're trying to do. And let me know what you thought. Okay, and I will talk to you next time.